Given the fact that I'm still alive today, I feel it my responsibility to report on the hell that has been the past few days. It is my hope that my first-hand experience with this malevolent substance can add to the canon of evidence regarding these incidents and, hopefully, help our community determine what went wrong. Everything I am writing is based upon my best recollection, which is severely altered, so please bear with me. As, hopefully, all know by now, something terribly, horribly toxic was packaged by Haupt RC, sold as 2CB-Fly, and distributed to an unknown quantity of purchasers around the world in the last 2 weeks. I, unfortunately, was one of the people who received a nice little letter from Denmark containing the faux 2CB-Fly, let's call it ChemX. I placed my order on September 28th. I received an email from Mr. Haupt on October 1st stating that my order would be mailed that same day. On Wednesday, October 7th, I received the envelope in Barcelona, Spain, and went directly into the drawer of my desk and was not touched until Saturday, October 10th. On this day, at approximately 1:45 p.m., I broke out the ChemX and some other recent purchases, the comparatively benign MDAI and JWH-073, in order to confirm their weight. I weighed first the MDAI and JWH-073. I used a milligram scale with a small circular metal tray. After I weighed each substance, I poured the weighed material back into its original bag, tapping the rear of the tray as best as I could to remove all residual powder. Of course, there's always a fine layer of material left behind. Finally, I opened the bag of 1,000 milligrams of ChemX and began to pour it into the tray. The first thing that struck me was the immense volume that such a weight occupied. In comparison with the previously weighed substances, each of whose 1,000 milligrams easily fit in the scale's tray, the ChemX was extremely fluffy. It was much fluffier than any other 2Cs I have been in contact with as well. In addition, it was a fine powder but with small clumps throughout the bag. I could only fit approximately 700 milligrams on the tray at once, so I weighed the bag in 2 goes. 700 milligrams the first time and the remaining 300 milligrams the second time. The bag weighed perfectly. Mr. Haupt, God rest his soul, was an honest, if ill-prepared chemical salesman. I replaced as much of the ChemX as I could into its bag, the same one featured in this photo. So at 2 p.m., in a moment of heightened ignorance, I wiped all the ChemX residue onto my finger, enough to turn the tip of my index finger white, and lipped it. That is to say, I wiped the material into the inside of my mouth opposite the lower lip. Additionally, I picked up a small clump of ChemX that had fallen on the table and put it under my tongue. Though I really have no accurate manner of judging it, I believe I may have ingested anywhere from 1 to 5 milligrams of the substance. That is my best estimate. Though it may have been more, I really have no idea. At an hour and 15 minutes in, my friend came over to my house. I told him I lipped some of this material and I was feeling a bit weird. Not tripping, but feel like I had a bunch of weird drugs working their way through my system. He noted that I looked a bit fucked up when he arrived. He suggested that it may be because I had combined residual amounts of MDAI, JWH-073, and ChemX. I agreed and thought nothing more of it. At an hour and 45 minutes in, we smoked a king-size spliff comprised of approximately 1/3 gram of Moroccan hash and 20 milligrams weighed of JWH-073, evenly distributed through the tobacco of 1 cigarette. I noticed smoking the joint got me much higher than normal, and I'm a daily marijuana user. I'd also previously tested the JWH-073 without experiencing a similar reaction. The feeling was not so much the lazy, heavy stonedness of the Moroccan chocolate, nor the spacey dopey high of the JWH-073, but rather I began losing my train of thought easily, and it was rather difficult to speak. We finished smoking and went to the store to get some food, water, and snacks. When I was in the grocery store, I had no idea what I should be getting, even though it was Saturday and I needed to buy my food for that day and the following. Stores are closed Sunday here. I ended up with an odd assortment of soft beverages and random snack foods. We walked back to my house, and on the way I noticed it felt very off to be walking. There was a feeling in my feet that made every step feel unnatural. Once we made it back to my house, the intensity was still approximately the same as it had been since we smoked. I couldn't say I was tripping, but it felt like there were some really weird drugs pulsing through my system. I prepared a pizza from a fresh crust with olive oil, tomato, cheese, bacon, and goat cheese. I put it in the oven, and my friend and I began watching a TV episode in the living room. While it was baking, I began noting my first hints of visuals, looking at the walls of the living room and the abstract paintings that are hung there. By 3 hours in, I could barely cut the pizza, let alone eat it. The medallions of goat cheese appeared to be morphing white cesspools on a bed of brown flesh and bubbling blood. Somehow, I got myself to eat 2 or 3 pieces. It tasted good, though after I'd done so, my stomach began aching quite a bit. My friend went home to take a siesta, and from here is when things get blurry. From this point, it is very difficult for me to describe or categorize the way I was feeling, but I'll do my best. I said okay and goodbye, but barely noticed when he left. We were supposed to meet with some friends at a bar at 11 o'clock that night. That didn't happen. I put the Beatles' Rubber Soul on my iTunes and laid down on the sofa. All I wanted to do was not move and keep my eyes closed. The music sounded pretty good, and soon incredible psychedelic scenes were unfolding beneath my eyelids. Such intense closed-eye visuals I've never experienced before. During this time, my mom called from my home country, and I didn't answer because I was too fucked up. That could have been my last chance to talk to her. Thank God, though, it wasn't. Kids, always answer your mom's phone calls. I continued feeling more and more lethargic. I was in a state somewhere between sleep and consciousness when my roommate came into the living room and roused me. He began talking to me in Spanish. I could barely comprehend what he was saying, let alone start speaking to him. I told him as best as I could that last night was rough, that I wasn't feeling well and I needed to rest. I must have looked crazy and horribly fucked up. I went into my room and laid down on my bed. The music was still playing, but it sounded really loud. I couldn't even bring myself to reach over and turn it down. For the next hour, I was in a nearly catatonic state, unable and not wanting to move. Eyes closed the whole time. I couldn't keep them open. However, the effects kept getting worse. Not in a linear manner, but rather in what seemed an exponential manner. It was 23 degrees Celsius, 74 degrees Fahrenheit outside, yet I was freezing. I was under all of the covers in my bed, yet I began sweating immensely. I couldn't tell if I was awake or sleeping, conscious or unconscious. It seemed I was somewhere in between the two. This scared me a bit. At approximately 5 hours in, I began getting really worried, so I forced myself to sit up, decided to take a hot shower to see if that would help. It didn't. I was still extremely flushed, cold, and perspiring what seemed like gallons of sweat. Mentally, I was a bit delirious, not like psychedelic conscious shifting, but in an uncontrollable disoriented sort of way. Then, about 15 minutes later, I logged online and searched Google. I came upon Arrowhead and my heart dropped when I saw the photo of the exact same bag that was sitting on my desk. I became angry, agitated, and threw the bag and some stuff off my desk. A violent reaction like this is not my character at all. Then I posted the following on Blue Light. I may have accidentally ingested some of this about 5.5 hours ago. Help, what do I do? Thankfully, the board instantly made me realize the gravity of the situation, especially Delsum fan, who stated there was about a 6-hour delay before things got really bad. He was 100% right. I threw on clothes and shoes as quickly as I could in my condition, put the bag of Chemex in my pocket, and began walking as fast as I could to the nearest subway station, about 700 meters. During this walk, I began feeling amazing pulses of energy coming through my brain, but not in a good way. It felt like there was a fireworks show going off in my head. These weird surges would continue randomly until the following day. They were very disturbing and concerned me that some major neurological damage may have been done. I must have looked like a lunatic, and I sure felt like one. I was completely out of it, walking through intersections with complete disregard for cross traffic. The weird feeling in my feet I mentioned earlier had intensified significantly, and I found myself questioning if I could make it to the hospital on my own. I was debating between calling an ambulance and taking the subway, but I finally reached the stop just as the train was arriving. In the metro, I don't remember anything, just dropping buckets of sweat everywhere. Effects were still getting stronger, and I was unsure if I'd be able to walk under my own power into the hospital. Finally, 3 stops later, I arrived to the hospital, and, after nearly being hit by a bus crossing the street, ran into the emergency waiting room. I cut everyone in line, ran to the check-in desk, and began spitting out my story in Spanish as best as I could. The check-in nurse pointed to a staircase and said to go down there ASAP. I took myself into the triage area and explained again the story. The attending nurses were freaking out over the whole thing. I wrote down on a piece of paper the name of Haupt, his website, Arrowhead, the name of the supposed chemical, and Blue Light. I told them I had eaten contaminated 2CB fly and gave them the baggie. I was admitted and they put me in a wheelchair and rushed me to the ER. I could barely stand as I had to take off my clothes. They were so wet it felt like I had gone swimming in them. They put me in a gown and went to work. They connected 14 or more EKG probes all over my body to monitor my heart's functioning. They also brought some special type of cardiac monitoring machine, no idea the name, and hooked me up to it. They drew blood for analysis and gave me 2 diazepam, I think 10 milligrams each. The doctor told me all he could do was give me the diazepam, keep the monitors attached, and stand by in case they needed to intervene. The rest was on my body to fight through. I have to say there was a good period there where I didn't feel like I was going to make it. Finally, the diazepam began to ease my extreme tachycardia and lower the blood pressure. However, there was some worry as my diastolic blood pressure began dropping below 60 as my systolic stayed high. Don't know what it means, but the docs were a bit worried. Thank God it passed. Now, diazepam is known for killing trips, but it merely dulled this one. The visuals and delirium persisted through the dosage of Valium, though it did sedate me a bit. I truly believe the diazepam, given to me when it was, helped prevent me from suffering major cardiovascular issues, as I had troubling levels of tachycardia and blood pressure, exact numbers I don't know. In fact, I believe it may be a major reason why I'm still here today to write this report. For the next few hours, I don't remember much. Just the screams and unpleasant noises from the ER seemed amplified in volume and magnified in the way they disturbed me. The open-eyed visuals continued distorting objects for hours. I thought a lot about how this would be such a horrible way to go, especially for my family and friends. What would it do to them for me to leave them like that, over something so stupid, preventable, and especially without telling them goodbye and that I loved them? I was determined to walk out of that hospital. I'm not a religious man, but by God, I prayed my ass off that night. At approximately 14.5 hours in, the doctor told me he was discharging me. I told him I didn't think I was ready to go, but he told me that if I had made it this far, that I would be okay. Unsure, thinking of how Halp died so far into his trip after sleeping, I reluctantly agreed and began to get ready to go home. I still felt awful, like I should be dead. I could still barely walk and I was mentally out of it. Somehow, though, I made it home and posted an update on Blue Light. The hallucinations had mostly gone, but the psychological and physical effects maintained their toxic presence in my system. My posting accurately reflects how I was feeling. I don't know if high is the right way to put it. Not right would be more accurate. Like, I'm not tripping, but I definitely still feel like I have poison inside of me. I didn't want to leave the hospital, but they made me. At that point, I still felt unsure I was going to be okay. I was still afraid to sleep because of what I had read about Halp's passing, but finally I turned off the laptop and tried to get some sleep. I got a horrible night's sleep, maybe 4.5 or 5 hours of oft-interrupted slumber. Probably never got more than 30 consecutive minutes of sleep. At about 21 hours in, I woke up and lay in bed, feeling like I should be dead. Both my head and body felt absolutely awful, like I had been poisoned and that poison was still inside of me. A little while later, I called my friend Vita Verde and she told me to come over to her place right away. Since then, I have been under her watchful eye, and she has been the most amazing, wonderful friend and nurse anyone could ask for. At 24 hours in, she gave me 1 milligram clonazepam, and that really helped me. The rest of the day I spent feeling not right. I don't know how to explain it. It really is impossible to describe. I didn't feel like myself. I could still feel the Chem-X just marinating in my system doing bad things. I didn't move from her couch nearly the whole day, and the time just passed by without me noticing. I felt horrible physically. I felt like I shouldn't be here. At 34 hours in, I took another 1 milligram clonazepam and proceeded to fall asleep on Vita Verde's sofa. I was out within 3 minutes and didn't wake up for almost 11 hours. When I woke up about 45 hours in, I felt refreshed physically, but my brain still felt odd. Now, at nearly 50 hours in, though physically feeling stronger, I still don't feel right. I'm sorry I can't be more specific. There's just no way for me to verbalize the way my head feels. Physically, I'm still lethargic and without any motivation to do anything. It has taken me several hours to write this report. I have no appetite. Vita Verde's been giving me little bits of food and I've been eating it, but I have no physical nor mental urge to do so. I have been drinking a saline and electrolyte solution that has been helping a lot to replenish the salts and minerals I lost through the flushing and sweating. I still don't feel normal. I hope I do soon. Right now, I am thankful that I am alive and able to be here writing this report. Thanks to everyone at Blue Light for their advice, concern, and support. I am thankful for the hospital employees for trying to help me, and I am especially thankful for Vita Verde's companionship and support through this whole ordeal. The recovery would have been a lot worse if I had to suffer through it alone. Thanks to everyone, and I hope that this report may contribute in some way to understanding what exactly was in that batch of 2CB fly. I drank a fairly average amount during high school and my first 2 years of college. I didn't like to party, but I did love getting drunk with friends. I'm a husky guy and can handle a lot of liquor at once, but I never exhibited any problem behavior. That all changed very quickly. The summer of 2017, right before I moved back to Arkansas for my 3rd year of college, my parents got divorced. In the fall, my dad got a debilitating brain infection and I dropped out of school to move home and be closer to my family. I moved in with my girlfriend of 4 years, who then broke up with me and kicked me out a month later. So there I was, a broken-hearted 20-year-old guy with a newly shattered family, back in my shitty hometown. So I started drinking, hard. I had a fake ID that I rarely used back in college. I was too scared to try it at bars or liquor stores, but in my hometown they sold hard liquor at grocery stores, so I started buying bottles of cheap whiskey that I chug every night to numb the pain. In the spring, my dad was doing better, so I went back to school and moved back in with my friends. I turned 21 soon after that, and all bets were off. I drank like a cartoon character for the next 2 whole years, almost comical amounts of alcohol. My friends and I were embracing the college burnout lifestyle, especially in the summer when it wasn't uncommon for each of us to put away a bottle of whiskey and a 6-pack every day. Eventually, my friends started to grow up and clean up their act, but I didn't. I knew I wasn't going to finish school. My family had no money left. I got a job as a kitchen manager at a pizza place / craft brewery, so free pizza and beer every night caused me to really start packing on the pounds. In late 2019, my dad had a really bad stroke due to lasting complications from his brain infection. I decided to move back home once again, this time taking my new girlfriend with me. We ended up living with my mom and her new boyfriend. Soon afterwards, COVID hit. This is when my drinking got really bad because I had to hide it. I went from being a free adult drinking whenever I wanted to being back under my mommy's roof. Her and my girlfriend could both tell I had a problem, so they began watching me more closely, which resulted in more private trips to the gas station to buy Gatorade, which really meant 4 or 5 airplane shots and a Gatorade to cover up my breath. This continued until I started to notice negative physical effects. I started getting sick to my stomach all the time, and throwing up became an almost daily occurrence. In August 2020, I was helping my mom do a landscaping gig at a bar, and I got caught on camera stealing liquor from behind the bar when I would go inside for breaks. After this, I went to rehab for the first time. I was there for 3 weeks, 1 in detox and 2 in the chemical dependency unit. They put me on all kinds of mood stabilizers, which I didn't need, and stopped taking once I got out, but they did put me on Seroquel, which was a saving grace at the time, but later turned out to be a huge mistake. I had always had sleeping problems, which was part of the reason I drank so heavily at night. What I didn't know was that Seroquel is dangerously addictive. Anyway, I stayed clean for about 2 months before my girlfriend broke up with me, and I relapsed immediately. It was bad for a few weeks, but eventually I got to a point where I was drinking like a regular human being again. Definitely still excessive, but it wasn't all day every day. I could go out somewhere, have 4 drinks and be satisfied. It was definitely progress. In the next few months, I got over my last ex very quickly and started dating an old friend that I'm miraculously still with today. A few months into our relationship, she announces that she accepted a job in Austin, Texas, and that she'd be moving there in May. I agreed to move with her, but decided to wait until August so I could stay at my job and save money. Big mistake. The moment she left, the stress drinking came back in full force and completely took over my life. It was back to all day, every day. I was a pizza delivery driver at this point, and I was essentially getting paid to drink and drive. I got into 3 separate accidents on the job, only one of them involved another car, but it totaled mine. It still blows my mind that I didn't hurt anyone or myself. My car was always overflowing with empty shooter bottles and tall boys. During this time, my anxiety got so bad that I convinced my psychiatrist to prescribe me Klonopin. I was never into taking benzos to get high. I just felt like at this point I needed the real deal to help calm my constant nerves. This ultimately made things worse, as I was now on 2 extremely addictive medications that, coupled with my alcoholism, made for some seriously dark withdrawal episodes. By the end of the summer, I had been hospitalized twice for dehydration, vitamin deficiencies, and low kidney and liver function. The second time, they did an endoscopy and found several ulcers in my esophagus and a yeast infection at the entrance to my stomach. They had me detox for a few days, gave me a bunch of meds for the ulcers and infection, and told me I had to quit drinking. Obviously, I never took the meds and went out drinking the night they discharged me. When I moved to Austin, I knew I had to get things under control, and I did for a couple months. Then my dad had yet another stroke. I couldn't move back home again. I had practically just gotten here. So there I was, living in a brand new city and knowing that my dad was back in the hospital 14 hours away. I gave up. I started drinking in a more savage, pathetic manner than I ever had. My girlfriend thought I had quit drinking after the second hospitalization, so I had to hide everything from her. Eventually, she knew what was going on, but we never spoke about it. I got sicker and sicker, rapidly. The main problem was my stomach. I was always so nauseous that I could never stomach most foods. I could also no longer stomach most hard liquor, so I was reduced to constantly chugging the strongest and cheapest malt liquor I could find, flavored Steel Reserve or Four Loko, supplemented with Fireball and hard seltzers. By December 2021, I had the same daily routine. I would wake up at 5 a.m., shake and sweat profusely until 7 a.m., when places started selling alcohol, when I would go to the gas station. I would get 3 tall boys and sit in the parking lot, alternating between drinking them and throwing them back up for about an hour. I would then go home, try and then fail to go back to sleep, then repeat this process one more time. When it was time to go to work, I would buy a 10-pack of Fireball shots and a 6-pack of White Claws to hide in my backpack and drink in the bathroom throughout the night. I would usually have to excuse myself to throw up 10 times per shift as well, meaning I was damn near useless on the job. I would get a few more tall boys on the way home, which I would drink and then throw back up. Then I would lay in bed in agony until I finally fell asleep for an hour or two, then started all over again. I had completely given up on water, and I had mostly given up on food. At one point, I didn't even attempt to eat for 4 days. I couldn't even get drunk anymore because I could barely digest the alcohol, so I was in a state of constant withdrawal. My anxiety and sleeping meds stopped working entirely, but my symptoms would get a million times worse when I ran out of them. My heart rate was always at around 120, and I was just waiting for that heart attack to come. Because I wasn't getting any food or water, just malt liquor and Fireball, the only nutrient my body was getting was sugar, so my shit and piss smelled like rotting fruit. I was completely malnourished, but I had swelled up to 265 pounds and was practically unrecognizable to people who had known me just 2 years prior. Every night I got stuck in hypnagogia, the state between awake and asleep, and it turned my nights into a hellish whirlwind of altered reality and stressful half-dreams. At one point, I had a vivid sleep paralysis episode where I could hear my girlfriend having sex with another guy in our living room, but I couldn't move or scream to do anything about it. At that point, I wouldn't have been surprised or even mad if she was cheating, because I had turned into a complete shell of my former self and a nightmare to live with. I finally realized that there was a 0% chance of me being able to pull myself out of this, so I checked into rehab for the second time. I have now been clean from alcohol and benzos for a year and a half, and I now take trazodone for my sleep problems instead of Seroquel. My life is a million times better, my relationship is a million times happier, but I'm still stricken with anxiety about the damage I've done to my body. It took me a long time to realize that I had a severe eating disorder on top of my addiction, and all that puking has left me with near permanent heartburn, not just acid reflux, the kind that makes you go to the ER because you think you're finally having that heart attack before they explain to you that your esophagus is just in really bad shape. I also now have extreme anxiety towards driving and can't really drive for more than 45 minutes without starting to dissociate, then panic. I am so thankful for my health and the fact that I somehow didn't completely destroy my liver, but knowing the amount of damage I've done to my body has left me with a permanently paranoid outlook on life. It was the summer after graduation, and it was the summer in a lot of ways. I had a lot of money and a carefree attitude. One fateful day, my friend Drew and I met a friend, Jay, by chance in a park, and he told us about how his cousin had given him some kind of strange plant, and you can apparently trip out from it. I was up for pretty much anything, minus heroin and meth. I'd vaguely heard of Jimson weed before, but wasn't very knowledgeable about it, other than from reading Castaneda. We said sure and drove to Jay's house. First, we smoked a joint, then we divvied up the 2 pods between the 3 of us. The seeds were little, clear, and somewhat bitter. We decided we didn't want to waste any of the plants, so we brewed a tea with the shells and drank it. Then we peeled off the inside skins of the pods and ate that. And finally we smoked the outer shell, then we smoked another joint. During the first 20 minutes, nothing too noticeable happened. Colors seemed more vibrant and my throat was getting kind of dry. When I went to the bathroom to pee, very little actually came out. Jay decided we should go to a different nearby park as his parents would be coming home soon. As we were walking to the park, basically I felt the effects of being poisoned. I had jello legs and my eyes couldn't focus on anything specific for very long. When we got to the park, we walked over and basically slumped down at a picnic table. At this point, my throat was painfully dry. We had a jug of water, which I kept drinking voraciously. I also really had to pee. I walked in a secluded area behind some bushes and tried. Nothing. Frustrated, I jello walked back to the table and our friend G was randomly there. He was driving past and saw us. As he was talking to us, he could tell we were different and lackadaisical. "Oh, I didn't know what you guys took," he said, and started laughing. I could barely look at him. He told us to call him later and tell him how our experience was. Then some girl came and sat down at the table and started talking to us. There's a school nearby, so there's lots of people in and out of the park. I don't remember what she said. Jay said he had to go home and we thanked him for the Datura. Drew suggested we leave too, and we got in the Montero and left. Then the unadulterated insanity began. Note, do not drive whilst on Jimson weed, ever. We left at about 4 p.m. We pulled up to Drew's house around 9 to 9:30 with no memory of what happened in between, none at all. Anyway, as we pulled into Drew's street, we noticed a lot of our friends' cars lined up around his house. There appeared to be a party going on. We assumed it had something to do with Drew's brother. As we pulled in his driveway, the neighbor's cat ran right in front of us. We felt a bump and knew Drew had just run it over. He felt really bad about it. We walked inside, and sure enough, there's a party going on. We see about 20 or so of our friends drinking, laughing, and being loud. There were also strangers. Drew excused himself and went into his room as he felt bad about the cat still. I was talking with some friends and I noticed my friend Preston, who was there, was crying blood. It looked like eyeshadow, a blood circle around his eyes. It was horrifically bizarre and he looked like he was in pain. "Are you okay?" I asked, and he just stared at me with an almost evil gaze, blood dripping from his face to the floor. I saw grotesque people I didn't realize, who looked like Sloth from the Goonies, but not in a comical way at all. They looked deformed, bruised, beaten, and burned as they shuffled around the house. Some were laughing maniacally, some crying, others just staring. It was unsettling to say the least. Things were also painted on. It's like a dream, and the 3D world is irrelevant. There were burnt cigarettes and tacks sticking sharp side up on the ground, and bizarre-looking plants pasted to the walls and doors. I then saw people with beet red skin crying blood. They looked like what you would expect demons to look like, just like every fairy tale or myth or religious text makes them out to be, minus perhaps wings. None of this seemed particularly odd to me at the time. I was confused who they were, but wasn't gripped with fear like I probably would have been was I sober. Some of these entities were having passionate, crazy sex in the back room, but they didn't look as if they were actually enjoying themselves. I kept hearing the sound of doors slamming. Drew came down to see what I was up to, and our friend Preston started talking to the both of us. "You guys are late. We were waiting for you," he said. "We didn't know this was going on," said Drew. "Where's Kyle?" I asked. Kyle is Drew's brother. "I haven't seen him yet," Preston replied. We talked, just the 3 of us, for a couple minutes, and then Drew excused himself to the bathroom. He couldn't pee the entire time either, and our throats were probably the driest they had ever been. It hurt to swallow. Then I met the spirit of the plant, Queen Talawachi, as she is known indigenously. She was pale, just not albino pale, but literally skin tone like the moon. She is also fond of tricks. I talked to her for a bit, though I will not share the conversation as I feel by doing so is disrespectful. I sat on the floor still noticing the tacks which shimmered in my peripheral. My friend Chloe walked in through the kitchen, looking frail, beaten, and toothless. She explained that a group of Mexicans had just beaten and gang raped her. I looked over at a towel and a clear cylinder on the table, only I didn't see the towel. I saw a talking head, and this head was Chloe's. She was crying hysterically, and Talawachi told me to give her a hug, which I did. I was literally hugging a beach towel in plastic. "Oh my God, Sam, what the fuck?" she gut-wrenchingly yelped, and then started crying. At this point, I honestly didn't know what to do, but my bladder felt like it was going to explode, so I said I'd be back and went downstairs to the bathroom. Drew's mom was playing solitaire on the computer and said hello to me. I waved and went into the bathroom. Chloe was sitting in the corner of the ceiling, laughing scarily. When I walked to the toilet, Chloe was standing in my way. "Chloe, can you please move? I have to pee like a racehorse." She just stared for a second and laughed. "Chloe, if you don't move, I'm going to pee on you." She just laughed again, louder. So that's what I tried to do. Again, almost nothing came out, but I did feel better. I went back upstairs. My dad was there randomly. He opened the front door and said, "Come on, kid, let's went." I wasn't expecting to see him there at all. "I'll meet you in the car." All right, I thought, and went outside. He was nowhere to be found. I did see my friend Tom, though, in an orange car parked right outside. He beckoned me to get in. I couldn't. The door was locked. He kept waving me inside. "I can't," I said. Then Tom started laughing, and this actually irritated me. "Forget it," I shouted at him. I was confused where my dad went, so I sat by myself on the curb. The house across the street has a wood stovetop chimney on the roof, but I saw someone committing suicide by hanging himself instead. It was like an animated GIF. When my eyes moved at all, it would reset. When they stayed focused, the man walked off the roof with a noose and hung there, waving in the breeze. I should have mentioned this earlier, but all straight lines shook, like an episode of Dr. Katz. Everything flickered actually, like I was witnessing the erosion of time. I had seen that kind of thing before while on strong acid, just the lines, not anything else. I look next to me, I'm still on the curb, and my friend Mike is by my side. "What's your problem, man?" he asked. "I don't honestly know, dude," I said. "I took this plant earlier, now I can't tell exactly what's going on." "That's fine and all, that would be a good excuse if you weren't being such an asshole right now." I felt like I was an asshole, ruining everyone's time, and I didn't know why. I glanced in Drew's Montero and saw possibly the scariest thing out of this whole experience. There was a pale creature with no eyelids, with the most piercing stare I've ever seen in my entire life, sitting in the front passenger seat. His head was shaped almost like sharks, pointing at the top, and he had no lips and sharp shark-like teeth. In fact, it looked exactly like the Hellraiser character Butterball, minus the sunglasses, and paler. Just like in the movie, he said nothing. I had seen Hellraiser once before, when I was like 12, and remember near to nothing from it. It wasn't until I saw that movie again that I made the connection. In fact, I'm fairly confident Clive Barker had taken Datura before, after going through this experience. And the fact he wore sunglasses in the movie, and in reality, call it what you will, had no eyelids at all, seems more than a coincidence to me. This powerful entity was the only one I could not look straight in the face. I tried avoiding his gaze the entire time. I looked at a tree in the front yard. I could see a ghostly essence in the tree itself. Actually, I could see the essence of all plant life. Chloe was right by that tree, falling over. I rushed to go help her, but she was painted on a tall piece of dead grass, blowing flimsily in the wind. I needed to pee again. I went inside through the garage, and somehow Chloe had beaten me there and was crying on a coat rack. "I don't want to live anymore," she cried, and it was apparent to me that she was hanging herself. "Chloe, no," I said, and reached to bring her down. It wasn't Chloe, it was just a coat. I put the coat back and entered the kitchen. Kyle was there. "Yo, Samwise, how's it going?" I actually thought about that question and laughed. "I don't know. How are you doing, Drew?" I asked a piece of paper which I thought was Drew, blowing from the fan. Kyle looked at me like I was the biggest dumbass in the world, and I don't blame him one bit. I went to the upstairs bathroom and the light didn't work, and the darkness seemed to make the vision stronger. The toilet seat was swirling and was fairly hypnotizing. I also saw what looked like a ghost or shadow creature on the floor next to the toilet, outlined by a translucent silver. He was completely two-dimensional and appeared to be asking for my help, though I couldn't actually hear anything he was saying. I finally peed, at least more than I had yet, and felt immensely better, though I felt sorry for the shadow creature. It was kind of a dusty bathroom, and there were glowing insects attracted to the dust. They looked like ants, mini spiders, and other insects which probably didn't exist, and they looked bioluminescent. I put my finger on the ground and let one crawl onto it. I examined it more closely, and its movements were that exactly like a bug's would be. It had feelers and was feeling me. I clamped my fingers together lightly, and the insect crumbled like dust, its legs floating spirally to the ground. I went back downstairs and Talawachi, still on the couch, asked, "Did you see the life upstairs?" I nodded. I looked around. Demons and deformed burn victims were still walking around nonchalantly. I went upstairs into Drew's room to see how he was doing. He was watching TV with Mike. Then we noticed the neighbor's yard via the window. It too was bizarre. There was a four-legged dog creature, very large and very black, with glowing red eyes, sitting on what looked like a throne on the side of a swimming pool. There were many people basically having a blood orgy, and massive amounts of steam were rising from the water. There were also dead squirrels which littered the ground, and all throughout the branches of a large tree were squirrel tails, hanging like evil Christmas ornaments. The dog, whom I later found out is the second spirit associated with Datura, or second half, depending on perspective. He is known sometimes as the guardian or protector and protects Talawachi, noticed us and beckoned us to come join them beyond the fence. Drew grabbed his binoculars and scoped out the scene. People were still having insatiable sex through a bunch of mist. However, with the binoculars, we saw everything in grave detail. I could see the hair on this demonic dog and the squirrel tails and everything in clear high definition. Me and Drew saw the same thing. Drew left to get a closer look, the dog and associate still beckoning us in. Drew went to the fence line as I stayed upstairs watching with the binoculars. He almost jumped the fence to join them, but I tapped on the window and shook my head. He came back up. We were tired and wanted to go to sleep. Drew has bunk beds and Mike called the top bunk. I said fine, but asked that he at least give me my sleeping bag. He said no. "Just give him his sleeping bag, Mike," Drew said. No. I tried pulling it from him, but to no avail. Annoyed, I gave up and went in the guest room trying to sleep as a spy creature watched over me, which was very unsettling. I didn't actually sleep and woke up at around 7:30. I decided to read up on Datura. Only when I got to the computer to do so, I couldn't read text. My vision was okay, but when I tried reading text smaller than billboard size, it was out of focus. This lasted for 2 more days, and during this time I thought I was never going to be able to read again. Same with Drew. In fact, the trip lasted altogether for 3 days, and the residues of it, like my eyes playing tricks on me, lasted for almost 2 weeks. I'll cut the other 2 days out as it's already been a fairly verbose story. Everyone was worried about us. They thought we were never coming down, and to be fair, neither did we. We saw Dr. Seuss creatures in trees, elves, gnomes, dwarves, pixies, demons, golems, all kinds of mythical, demonic, spiritual creatures. And everything Drew saw, I saw, and vice versa. We ran over a ghost with the car. Digital clocks would make Tamagotchi-like animations. It looked 8-bit. The auditory hallucinations did stop after the first night, the visuals mostly after the 3rd night. On the 3rd day, me, Drew, and a group of our friends went into a gazebo, a usual smoking spot, in a garden to smoke. I saw gnomes having sex in the trees. Little creatures would slowly bring antennas up out of the bushes, and whenever Drew and I would compare what we saw, our friends were like, "That's not fucking there, stop it." A train went by. We weren't that far from the tracks, and an obese naked woman was having sex with the tree just outside the garden. Every time she went down, the train blew its horn. The train was actually there. Our friends acknowledged that. It was uncanny. She would stay down for 3 seconds, and the train would blow for 3 more. This experience has made me think about it every time I hear a train. I ran into Jay a few days later, and he thought we had never left. He hung out with us all throughout the night. Also, amazingly, Drew's parents, who were actually there the entire time, had no idea we were on anything. I don't know how. We were talking to people who weren't there, basically right in front of them. We were lucky in that respect. Afterthoughts. First of all, I'd like to say, do not take Jimson weed. 99.99% of everyone should never take this. It's all too common for someone to get arrested or end up in a psych ward, or even get shot from walking into someone else's house, not knowing what's going on. It's also very easy to be poisoned to death. People have died from it before. Also, you will be tested by the spirits, and if you fail, there can be dire consequences, particularly with the protector/wolf. It is not a pleasant high. In fact, there is no high. I felt completely normal despite the craziness I witnessed. It was kind of amazing I remember taking anything at all. That's not common. I didn't really think twice about what I was seeing, just like I probably don't in a dream. This is clearly a negative plane of existence. I don't know if I believe in hell, but there is one. This realm surely has some kind of correlation. Also, it has been said that Datura seeks you out, not the other way around. I deeply believe this to be true, and I believe that I was seeked out. I think Jay and Drew were caught in the crosshairs. To say this was all just in our minds is hard to justify. We interacted with people who weren't there simultaneously, witnessed the same things, and saw in blaring detail clear images through binoculars. I admitted much of what happened, largely because of length, and largely because much of what I experienced I consider sacred, particularly some of the conversations. Not holy per se, but sacred. Also, I found that the first encounter with an entheogen sets the tone for the rest of the relationship. Talawachi still visits me periodically in my dreams. All in all, I'm glad I experienced this, as I learned much, particularly about the nature of reality and realities. From the age of around 15, I started experimenting with more intriguing drugs than weed and booze. Ecstasy became available to me, and anything I can get my hands on became my limit of intake. Poppers were the first solvent abuse I had tried. They were fun because they were quite intense, though didn't last for too long, but the downfall was the throbbing headache which followed every worthwhile session. Weed was always my backbone drug, but when supplies wore thin, I would scour the house for anything that could possibly get me fucked. I found butane, an interesting substitute for poppers, an almost identical high, maybe a bit longer lasting, and no pain. Every now and then I would do a small amount, but it got to the point where I wanted more and more, and within one night I dramatically increased the dosage. Lying in bed with my TV on, I would be popping toots, like a bong, but instead of a gauze you use a tobacco plug, and when it's all burnt you suck it all through the downpipe and get a nice satisfying though somewhat painful rush. Maybe 2 or 3 in rapid succession, followed by 10 to 30 lungfuls of butane. I didn't close my mouth around the nozzle fully for fear of suffocation or overdose. I started to feel warm and fuzzy, and all of a sudden I would pass out and enter a dreamlike trance. I never realized that I had passed out because it was as though I was still lying in the same position, but strange things started to happen around me. It's hard to put them in order because it was a while ago, and I'm sure it fucked with my head and somehow altered my perception of reality. I would feel some strange connection with, I don't really know what, spirits, elements of my subconscious, other minds around the world experiencing the same thing as me. In another trip report, there was a description of an alternate reality called the Boink World. That particular word intrigued me because I often heard faint bouncing sounds and half-imagined minds of other more experienced butane heads bouncing on some sort of psychic spring, which enabled them to travel through the minds of others on the gas, but I also got the feeling there was some place they gathered. I imagined some sort of butane rave and felt the energy flowing through me like they knew me, and I was completely accepted, and I knew and understood them too. I'm trying to be as specific as possible, but it's difficult to describe exactly what I experienced. I have realized through several phases of drug use and abuse that there is no way to fully explain a drug experience in a way others can understand, and this is something I have always been interested in, so I saw no other way than to try myself. Given the chance, I probably wouldn't do it all again. Other experiences include actors on TV stopping to watch me and whisper about me on screen. Weird and random stuff like looking shocked and asking each other, "What's he doing? Will he live?" Crackheads drink it to deal with a come down. I'm not on crack though. I thought there was a tube connecting my TV to some source where the world could watch me for a while, and though I knew it was pretty stupid and unlikely and completely eccentric, I still checked it most nights to be sure. I was watching one thing where a man and a woman were sitting on a bed. The TV started to flicker and the picture bent out of shape in places, and then it was as though the camera panned to the right to reveal the woman only, and she was looking right at me. "I want to have your babies. Come with me, I will show you." The gas starts to wear off and her voice is gone. I wipe the cold drool from the side of my mouth and look up to see some other completely unrelated scene. The woman reappeared at a later date. She made a picture of me shown on the screen, then it cut to a close-up of my eye and a portion of one side of my face, and as it appears, all that is shown on TV becomes numb and starts to twitch, like pins and needles or a muscle spasm. I think I asked how she did it, but it was too late. The stuff doesn't last long enough. I've tried taking more and more, but I lose track of what I am doing. I end up holding the can above my face, which lets the liquid rather than the gas into my mouth, which is cold and kind of freeze burns my tongue and just feels fucking wrong. I see myself throwing up foam, and the woman is above my head on TV shouting my name, asking if I'm okay. I've inhaled imaginary cardboard squares which I believe were at the bottom of the can above a spring to force the gas out, and believed I was choking trying to cough up the cardboard. A minute or two passes and I look for the foam or the cardboard, but there's nothing. But it's all so real. I ignore the fact that it's not when I sober up. There have been little transparent purple cactus men walking past my bed and jumping through a crack in my wall saying he'll be back later to take me to a butane mine gathering. I've spoken to the butane and it vibrated in response. For one night, they were conscious particles from some distant asteroid, harvested for our need for fire, unknown to the majority that they actually induce mind expansion or psychic powers, or some other bullshit, resulting from a brain which is probably functioning at less than half its usual waking ability. A scary one was more like a dream than most of my hallucinations. On TV was some strange image of a girl's face with some sort of tube in her mouth. Not like a hospital tube, but like some paper rolled up to suck Maltesers or something. My mind said that this was my girlfriend, though I'm not sure who I was at the time. I was sucking the other end of the tube, and some evil force was making us battle in some way. We were both being drained. I felt like I was being forced to take some horrible drug, and whoever took the most or gave in first would suffer some terrible fate. I gave in and my girlfriend was ripped away from me, and all there was around me was darkness, and there was nothing to hold on to, so I was just falling and falling and falling into more darkness. Sometimes I think I almost OD'd on the gas, and I was falling to hell for all the horrible things I've done. I don't know if or when I stopped falling, but I ended up in my bed again. Butane was starting to hurt. My lungs felt like they were coated in a thin layer of melted plastic or cling film, and hard lumps were constantly easing their way up my throat, but emerged as a white stringy liquid. My head felt empty and strained, pushed to the edge of exploding or caving in. I stuck to toots for a while. They got me to sleep okay. I didn't need a trip, but every time I remembered the weird, the crazy, the unreal, I had to go back. There was no feeling like it. I started doing ecstasy and acid, and after having a really bad trip on acid and a little ketamine, I retired to my room and got on the lighter gas, and instantly my head pounded and thudded like never before. I've never felt such pain. I grabbed either side and struggled to breathe, and all I could see was black and red and jagged lines, like lightning. I thought I was having a stroke. Since then, I did it occasionally, but all that happens is the people on TV say things about me, things they know will hurt. I've had so many weird experiences, painful, things that make me feel empty and inhuman. I blame acid, ketamine, pills, and weed, but butane is the first hardcore drug I did, and I did it to excess, and I think that is what did all the damage. Other drugs just brought it out. Butane has fucked me. I know because my mates have done the same amount and the same sort of drugs as me, barring butane, and have no such side effects. I've stopped it now, stopped butane, but still battle with harsh paranoia, social awkwardness, delusional beliefs, superficial relationships, an uncontrollable fear of the world outside my head, and lack of connection to anything real and solid. I know people can read minds and they know what I have done, but then I don't really know if it's real, and I never will. The boundary separating my mild insanity and eccentricity from the real world has crumbled away, and only now is starting to rebuild, but I am not the same. I took some things too far, but I still think back and imagine maybe I could experience it again. It was fucking fun, but even mainstream drugs have their unknown, unexpected side effects. I had recently obtained a gram of 25I-NBUME from a supplier from which I frequently purchased various novel psychoactive compounds. This was going to be the strongest substance I had tried next to LSD. I had tried it a few other times as blotters and a few times prior via vaporization and sublingual routes. I also came to realize that it absorbed very well through the skin when laying blotters for friends. This trip was entirely accidental, and since I did not expect it, things went very bad very quick. It was a normal day. I had gone to work and was finally home. Plus, best thing of all, it was Friday. I worked at a finance company as a customer service representative, which could be stressful at times. I usually came home to unwind and then experiment with a new substance or route of administration at this time. There were new chemicals coming out pretty much every week at that point. It was a perfect scenario for someone who has a high degree of novelty seeking and enjoyed experiencing new states of mind. I had just dissolved a gram of 25I-NBUME in 500 milliliters of isopropyl alcohol the day prior, and I thought to myself that I should probably dye it blue to differentiate it from water. Being that it was summer, I was consuming a lot of water from bottles that were similar to this bottle of 25i NBUME. Somehow, due to my neglect, the bottle of 25i got mixed up with the bottle of water and I took it with me on a bike ride to the local park. I met up with some friends and we began to unwind and play hacky sack. A few of us went into the woods to smoke some cannabis. We came back from the woods and found that a few more strangers had joined our party, one of them a girl who wanted to ride my bike because it was a retro racing bike. I allowed her to do so and then we got to know each other a little bit. At some point I remembered I had a bottle of water to quench my cotton mouth that I had developed. I took a large swig and then, about 5 seconds later, I felt a stinging before I could swallow. Then it dawned on me what I had done. I spit the swig of N-bomb solution out, but it was too late. I announced very quickly what I had done to everyone, so if anything happened we'd be all on the same page. At least there was one other person who knew exactly what 25i NBUME was and could help. I calculated the approximate dose I just sublingualed to be 300 milligrams less than whatever didn't get absorbed. Suddenly, reality began to break. I looked at a tree and it was a layer, and the river in the background was another layer, and I was my own layer. It was as if everything had its own layer depending on where it was in my visual field. It was as if reality was sliced into different layers, as if everything were a painting. Everything began to look surreal, but more vivid than normal at the same time. The girl and her friend went with me down by the river as the trip began to intensify. What have I done? I asked myself. The answer I already knew, I just didn't know how to fix the situation. My mental state began to deteriorate. I found a large ant walking across a rock that I was sitting on. I gave it a drop of the N-bomb solution out of curiosity. The ant began to rub his feelers with his front legs as if he was trying to remove the solution. He then proceeded to walk and eventually he began to stand on his hind legs and put his front legs together as if he was praying to me, probably to make the experience stop, I thought to myself. I felt terrible, for if he felt anything like I did at the time, then I wished for his misery to end. Now he's going to die, I said out loud as I grew worried about the ant's condition. I, in essence, was in the same boat as the ant. The girl I was with replied, "At least he got to trip before he died." I took this to heart. At least if this extreme dose of 25i NBUME killed me, I died doing what I loved, experimenting with novel substances. It grew dark and one of our musician friends came around. My best friend informed him of what had occurred and immediately the musician friend grew very concerned. "How the fuck are you alive right now?" I told him it was probably due to me having a tolerance since I'd been playing with this compound for the past few days. He assured me that no tolerance can prevent death from such an overdose. I couldn't calm down. It was as if my soul wanted to escape my body, but instead it was bouncing around my insides trying to get out. So much nervous energy I couldn't channel it. I quite frankly can't remember how I got home, but I know that I must have biked down the main road through town. When I got home, I remember looking up information about MK-Ultra, and I convinced myself that the research chemicals that were being developed and distributed were a new form of this mind control program developed during World War II. I called my best friend at some point trying to explain my theory to him. He was shook. First, he wondered how I had heard of this program, so I explained. Somehow it had surfaced to my conscious mind during this trip after being hidden away since childhood. I first learned of it when I was at my grandmother's house exploring the internet when I was 8 years old. I didn't understand the exact depth of what I was learning at the time, and I didn't realize that the knowledge I was learning had been hidden away from most textbooks. I digress. This realization of what may or may not be occurring bothered me deeply, and my psyche began to shatter. I was further bothered by the fact that it was year 2012 and many social transformations were occurring. Protests were going on across the country, and every day we were hearing about the Mayans having predicted the end of the world. There was also the fact that Anonymous had been hacking into countless websites and databases. As those who lived through this period remember, no one was safe. As my situation progressed and I became increasingly paranoid, the weekend came to an end and I had to return to work that Monday. Upon my return to work, I recall having many instances in which I told the customers the government was spying on them. I'm sure my supervisors were very concerned about my mental state. Psychosis had seemed to creep in at this point. This was beyond tripping. Eventually, I filed for FMLA and sought treatment at a psychiatric hospital that also specialized in drug dependency treatment. I remember having to explain what 25i NBUME was to the guy doing my intake. He was utterly confused because no one had heard of this drug. While there, I was given antipsychotics and SSRIs to reduce the impact of the drug, Prozac and Zyprexa. After 2 weeks of treatment, I was capable of explaining to the psychiatrist responsible for my care what my plan was once I left. He allowed me to go home as long as I continued to take my meds and seek treatment. After coming home, I quit my job without any good reason and began to work in a dirty warehouse. This is something that I regret to this day. I allowed 25I-NBOMe to sidetrack my entire career. Things would never be the same. When all my friends asked what happened, I often gave them the explanation: I tripped for 40 days and 40 nights. They were somewhat shocked by my response being such, but it's the response that felt most natural to me. I really had tripped for 40 days and 40 nights. When I looked at the calendar and tallied the days and nights, it was 40 of each. The fact that 40 days and 40 nights may remind you of the story of the flood that Noah survived in the Christian Bible is no surprise. This is what most people were reminded of when I told my tale. I, after having time to reflect, have somewhat amazed myself that this is really how long the trip lasted. Being someone not of religious background, I did not give second thought to telling people that I tripped for this amount of time. Again, this explanation just rolled off my tongue and held true. I actually came to learn that the number 40, according to many scholars, is representative of a time of testing or judgment by God. After coming to my senses, I became extremely fascinated by the experience and was much more open to religions in general. There had to be something to them if what I experienced just happened to me. Maybe a higher power was testing me, or maybe it was just the drugs activating the same part of the brain involved in religious experience. All in all, what I took from this experience is that one should always put safety first and dye solutions blue before storing them. Also, I came to believe that there is definitely something more to the Bible and religions than meets the eye. I also discovered that my physiology is quite different than most people's, seeing as I miraculously survived this ordeal with minimal negative effects, while others have died after having consumed much less. My friends still are amazed to this day that I'm still alive, despite the fact that I am known by the closest people in my circle to have regularly taken heroic doses of many types of drugs with less effect than most. None of them expected me to come out of this relatively unfazed. Me taking upwards of 25mg doses of 25I-NBOMe was not unusual, and I have done this multiple times on purpose. But this dose was an entire order of magnitude outside of my above average doses. I urge anyone reading to please be careful with such potent compounds. I also apologize because I feel I contributed to this substance becoming illegal the following year. I had ordered a synthesis of NN-DMT from an online source and was waiting quite impatiently a couple of days for the compound to arrive. I had experimented with DMT in the past, providing me with profound epiphanies and the inexpressible leap into hyperspace. I was eager to go there again. Being a daily cannabis user, I'd smoked a couple bowls of good weed early in the morning and was slightly stoned when the doorbell rang. Much to my delight, it was FedEx. After signing for the package, I closed the door and ripped it open. Inside was a baggie of pure oxide white powder labeled Chem 20. My very first mistake was not contacting my source to verify the chemical code label. I measured out 50mg of the fluffy white powder and proceeded to smoke it in a freebase pipe. Set and setting was perfect. I was in a great state of mind, and the next few days ahead of me totally free. Spangle was playing on the DVD player, and it was the first month of spring. After smoking, I realized there was something wrong. The vapor did not burn my lungs the way DMT did in the past. I laid down and waited. After 5 minutes, I became worried. I was obviously tripping, but it was weak. It lacked the bang of DMT. Eyes closed, the visuals resembled a very colorful version of 2cc, but I was also seeing blue cyberpunk-esque creatures morphing into a myriad of other strange beings. I thought the synthesis was weak or the potency was quite low due to the instability of tryptamine molecules. My next big mistake was smoking the other pre-measured 50mg of the powder. I lied down for a while with closed eyes expecting hyperspace, but alas, all I got was more of the same, greatly intensified. I thought, well, that sucked, and looked at my watch. It had been 15 minutes since the first dose. I expected to be coming down soon, but much to my chagrin, the effects started intensifying. I started tripping harder than I ever had for several years and was steadily growing stronger. With an intense surge of energy, I decided to take a walk in the local park thinking I could walk it off. I walked for maybe a half an hour and my agitation was increasing rapidly. How could this be? It's a physical impossibility to be tripping so long and so hard and in such a way after an hour of smoking DMT. I remember thinking if something I had consumed earlier caused MAOI activity, but could not recall anything. I called a friend on my cell asking for help. He was at work. Having no benzos on hand, I kept asking if he can give me some Xanax. He told me he didn't have access to those meds. I decided to walk back home. On the way through the crowded park, a cannabis dealer who I knew spotted me. He was among a couple of friends smoking joints there. He invited me to sit down and join them. I decided to be polite and did so. After taking a few puffs, I realized my internal chaos was being potentialized by the cannabis. I remember them looking at my pupils, which were probably insanely big at the time. I politely asked to leave and left. On the way home, I bought 2 beers thinking maybe they can bring me down for some reason. When I got back home, 2 hours had passed and I was tripping even harder. It seemed I hadn't even reached the peak yet. After drinking the beers and smoking a few more bowls, I thought, okay, this is getting worse. I decided to call my sister, who was a medical intern only a couple months away from graduation. She was very worried and decided to come over, but also had no idea how to get any benzos for me. I told my wife on MSN that I smoked DMT and something abnormal had happened. She left work right away to come home. My state of mind was absolutely bonkers. I was extremely agitated, had no idea why I was tripping so hard and why I was taking so long. In that warped state, I managed to email my source explaining my situation and mentioning the chemical label on the baggie. I soon got a reply. They had accidentally mixed the chemicals, and what I had smoked was actually 100 milligrams of 2CE. After that point, I managed to calm down a little, realizing the potency and the duration of the chemical. By the time my sister and wife came home, I had smoked around 5 grams of White Widow strain cannabis and was popping in and out of reality in waves like a high dose of 2CE does. However, this was my very first time on this particular compound, and I only had a few phenethylamine reference points, which were 2CB, 2CC, 2CI, methylone, MDA, and MDMA. 2CE was deeply introspective, and I felt like I was diving headlong down the rabbit hole with no way back out. I suspect the darkness aspect I feel from 2CE is due to its introspective nature. It has very powerful visuals, but also has the potent self-analytical properties of LSD. Therefore, I was forced to look into the mirror of my psyche for most of the trip. When my wife and sister got home, I calmed down a little, and my wife told me to take a shower, which I did, and it was one of the most profound moments of my life. I have no idea how long the actual shower lasted for, but on the Shulgin scale, I was at a +4. I have only been in such a state 3 times before in my life, once on a high dose of cyan-copalandia mushrooms and twice on NN-DMT. As the water splattered around me, they created endless fractal micro-universes inhabited by microscopic wonders, strange creatures that multiplied infinitely around me, singing enchanting melodies of cosmic oneness and about the multiverses that lie beyond. I was utterly dumbfounded. I cannot even begin to explain the cosmic explosions that were taking place right then and there in my shower and in my inner space respectively. But as all good things must come to an end, so did this. As soon as I got out of the shower, my state of bliss was replaced again by the hardcore anxiety of overdosing on a novel substance that was completely new to me. My wife put on some Simpsons episodes which I could not understand at all and found unbelievably funny. I laughed myself silly for about a half an hour and had to make myself stop as I had the impression that my wife would think I was going mad. That was the turning point. The thought stuck and the fear of madness grew inside of me like a psychedelic tumor. I was slowly going nuts. As these thoughts raced through my mind, my visuals changed into a more stylized, surreal circus freak show. The pink elephants from Dumbo, coupled with bouncing multicolored rabbits, circled around me singing, "He's lost it, he's lost his marbles." This continued for several hours, and as the visuals danced around me, I started becoming aware of my physical discomfort. I had severe back and neck pains, all my muscles were tightly knit, I had major teeth grinding, and a hell of a lot of fatigue. The problem was I was still tripping my ass off with no end over the horizon. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't sit still. I kept pacing back and forth around the house as my wife and sister watched. This increased my agitation and anxiety as I thought they believed I had lost my mind. This in turn potentiated the chaos in my psyche and brought forth more psychotic hallucinations. Anyway, this continued for about 4 more hours, during which I smoked another 5 grams of cannabis and drank a bottle of wine to relax, but it was doing no good. I kept persisting and badgering my sister that I needed Xanax, Haldol, or Thorazine. I was in desperate need of an abort. Soon after, my sister and wife left to the hospital where my sister was an intern to get some meds for me. During that time, I smoked about 3 to 4 more grams of cannabis, found a bottle of absinthe in a cupboard and drank all of it, and raided the medicine cabinet and took about 10 Incident tablets and about 3 ergotamine tablets. They didn't seem to do too much, so I also downed half a bottle of passion flower extract. Being in such a state, I could not realize my stupidity. They finally got home and managed to give me 2 Haldol tablets and a bar of 2 milligram Xanax. My sister told me to try the Haldols first. After about 1 to 2 hours of waiting, they didn't seem to do too much, but the visuals lessened considerably. I then took the Xanax and fell asleep soon after. I awoke the next morning. I was not tripping, but the physical and psychological symptoms continued. I soon worked myself into a state of high anxiety and the muscles all over my body were extremely tense. During that day, I secretly smoked the rest of my pot, drank all the spirits in the house, and finished the passion flower extract and the Incident tablets in order to calm down, which didn't do much for me. Then, among my stash, I found some Blue Lotus resin extract times 15. I ate a gram which calmed me down for a few hours until I was at my agitated state again. It had become nighttime by now, and I swallowed the remaining 1 gram of the Blue Lotus extract, which put me to sleep. I awoke the following day with the same symptoms and was increasingly agitated with massive anxiety. I thought I had literally gone mad. The entire day was a nightmare, and that night I convinced my sister to give me a box of Valium. This is where I spiraled out of control. To control my panic attack, I ate the diazepam like candy, finishing the box within 2 days, so I was told. I don't remember much of those days as I was in a zombie-like state. When they were finished, my anxiety returned even worse, and I convinced a friend who was prescribed clonazepam to give me 7 tablets which I consumed in 1 day, so I am told. Again, I don't remember much of this. When those were all gone, I went nuts again and told my wife and sister to take me to the hospital. I was admitted into the psych ward for 2 days and 1 night, where I was given an IV drip and diazepam surrounded by clinically insane patients. My wife and sister were with me the entire time and I couldn't have gotten through without them. The doctors didn't want to let me go, but since they knew my sister, they let it slide. They had no idea what 2CE was, they had never heard of it before, and I'm pretty sure I'm the very first and only case of 2CE hospitalization in my country. I convinced the doctors there to prescribe me clonazepam and we left for home. The following week is a haze which I don't remember at all. Apparently I was consuming 5 to 7 tabs of clonazepam a day and turned into a zombie, asking the same questions over and over again, and forgetting I took a pill and kept taking more. The memory loss was huge. Friends came to check up and visit me. I don't remember any of it. After a week of this, my sister, wife, and my mom got me an appointment for a good psychiatrist. Thankfully, she cut the benzos right then and there and wrote me a prescription for Inderol, a beta blocker for anxiety, and trazodone for the insomnia. After that, I started to get better. I decided to kick my 12-year daily cannabis addiction, but the timing was all fucked up as I lived through 2 weeks of total insomnia and depression from hardcore benzo withdrawals and going cold turkey off the pot. Instead of ending this harrowing trip report here, I would also like to add the final cosmic slap in the face. About 13 days after recovery, having kicked my pot and benzo addiction, the cops arrived at my door with a search warrant. Apparently a neighbor spotted the 30 cannabis plants growing in my greenhouse, which I had neglected for those 2 to 3 weeks. I had planned to destroy them or give them away, but was currently living with my sister and mom with my wife as a sort of rehab. Anyway, while the cops were questioning me and taking the plants, my sister managed to flush my huge stash in the freezer down the toilet and throw the rest out the window before they got to it, which was a considerable loss. I had a few sheets of very clean LSD, 2 grams of DMT, the source mailed it to me 2 days after the disaster, a lot of DPT, some AMT, a fair bit of iprosin and miprosin, half a kilogram of Hawaiian mushrooms, half a kilogram of Colombian mushrooms, a hell of a lot of Bromo-DragonFLY, DOC and DOI blotters, a big jar of 25 times salvia extract, 4 to 5 grams of mescaline, 2 kilograms of Mimosa hostilis root bark, 3 kilograms of Psychotria viridis, a huge bag full of Banisteriopsis capi and a huge stock of Harmala extract, 3 grams of pure MDMA crystals, 5 grams of methylone, that fateful gram of 2CE, 500 milligrams of 2CC, and 2 grams of 2CB. I had much more, but I can't remember what else I had in there. Oh well, live and learn. The cops then took me and processed me. After 6 months, my court case was up, and I was very, very lucky to just get away with a warning. I managed to talk the judge down from an equivalent $50,000 fine or 1 year jail. After all this happened, what affected me deeply and really hurt me was having to put my wife and family through my suffering. Even though everything is now back on track and better than ever 1 year later, I really regret having to drag my wife and mother through so much pain. I have learned a great respect for psychedelics, and 4 trips a year is all I need now to experience the indescribable. Friday the 13th, November 2015, I was sat at my dining room table. Me and my partner had just smoked a joint and had a couple of beers. I smoke daily and have dabbled with a few substances over the years. At the time, I was very naive about the newest wave of legal highs. I smoked spice when I was a kid, maybe 9 years ago, and it gave me a headache. I usually research obsessively before touching anything new. I'm the sensible one most of the time. This day was definitely not my finest. He brought home a legal smoking blend a mate passed him in work. It looked sort of like ground shitty weed, was nearly tasteless, odorless, and it smoked extremely smoothly. I said a few days prior, it could be any shit in there, but I decided to take a single hit, a decent sized one. It was probably about 8 or 9 p.m. I lit half a small bowl and held it in, expecting a slight rush if anything at all. As I exhaled, I instantly felt like I had just taken 1,000 times hit of salvia. I was frozen with a sense of fear that became more overwhelming with each passing moment. I felt like a ton of bricks was on top of me. My partner was aware something was wrong and thankfully didn't take his hit. I kept repeating, "Is this salvia?" Past experiences with salvia had sworn me off ever touching it again long ago. In that moment, I was actually really willing it to be true, but I knew this felt somehow more sinister. My ears began ringing, my vision became restricted, and I could feel familiar salvia-esque burning pins and needles all over me. I told myself to breathe and keep it together, but there was a sense of impending doom. Then time started to slow down. My boyfriend told me my eyes rolled into the back of my head, and the next hour or so I spent generally scaring the shit out of him, switching between unconsciousness, twisting myself around inhumanely, convulsing, and later screaming the house down. He said to me, "You were unconscious, motionless, and completely unresponsive for at least 10 minutes at the start, then violently sick everywhere. The screaming was about 20 to 25 minutes in and lasted about 1 to 2 minutes, eyes fixed on me, head following like a demon or possessed person." I've tried a few psychedelics, 1P-LSD, shrooms, LSA, and salvia, but never had anything close to this level of dissociation or total immersion in the experience. I was ripped out of existence. There was no linear flow of events. Time became meaningless, seeming as though it had collapsed to zero and everything happened at once. So the following is in the best order I could put it in. I was going to die or become a vegetable, then my parents would find out. I would lose my job, my house, my partner. These scenarios were circling my mind until all comprehension of the meaning of these things was lost. Each notion became part of an endless loop of flesh-colored cell-like blobs that were moving around each other in some dark two-dimensional place. I was part of it, and I felt the eerie physical sensations of twisting and contorting within the midst of it all. After some time, I became aware I had no memories of anything before this, no understanding of anything in the physical world at all, no sense of who or what I was. I didn't remember how I got there, so I concluded I was there all along. I observed this place completely horrified, confused, and desperate. I remember thinking, "This is it? I don't want to exist anymore." Repeatedly through the experience, I would snap back into reality. The first time this happened, my boyfriend was on the phone. I was somewhat coherent of the situation, but I thought he was talking to my mother, so I tried to take it out from his hands. He was actually, of course, calling an ambulance. He passed me the phone, seemingly relieved as he thought I was coming down. Later he told me I just looked at it very confused and passed it back to him before spacing out again. The next aspect of the trip I cannot unfortunately do justice. It was cold, mechanical, and it's marred into my mind, but it's completely nonsensical. There was a consistent, searing, unbearable pain, but I can't relate to any sort of physical pain because I could not discern myself from the environment. It was mostly black, superseded with white and blue geometry, and symbols flickering, shooting, branching out, and spiraling with fierce intensity and speed, looping but elaborating on itself each time. The sensation was ineffable. I felt every contradiction, forcibly understood but completely impossible. All my senses are overloaded and combined in an undecipherable soup. I didn't have the means to rationalize. I couldn't make a thought as there were no words. I ceased to exist. I never did exist, but it was somehow clear that this is all there ever was or will be, and there was nothing that could be done. Eventually, a silhouette of a human shape appeared against the dark background. It was completely foreign to me at the time. I suppose I opened my eyes and my boyfriend was talking to me in the real world, but I couldn't understand what language was or how to process it. I felt devoid of any human brain function, and it seems impossible to try and explain how that felt to anyone of rational mind. I might have begged for death if that was a conceivable option. However, for the majority of the experience, I didn't even have the slightest idea that I was a living being under the influence of a drug. There was a picture on the wall I was staring at because it was the only thing that seemed familiar. I was trying to figure out why I knew I liked this picture, although I couldn't see or understand what it was. It was a signed band poster we had framed. I felt that as I was pushing on the floor looking at this picture, this was taking me to where I needed to be. This is hard to explain, but the real world wasn't the real world. This is hard to explain, but the real world was not the real world. It was presented as the opposite to where I was, and was utterly impossible for the strange place to be a true representation of the real world. I accepted this, but more than anything, just wanted to play the game again. To reach the other side, each time I had to solve excruciating loops within loops. My thought processes were so delusional and erratic during this. I'm not able to remember anything other than mental anguish. It seemed futile, but I was driven by raging instinct during a few moments of this seemingly fake existence. But whenever I succeeded and tried to grasp onto anything, something triggers the whole process again. The matrix descends from the ceiling and swallows me whole. When I began to regain my sense of self, I came to a few strange conclusions. Like my mother and boyfriend were with me inside this plane, their presence and thoughts interpreted in the streams of data. I was heartbroken they were here experiencing this pain. This led to me coming up with the bizarre idea I dropped acid with my mom, who has never in her life taken any drug other than prescription meds and alcohol. I think this female presence may have actually been the paramedic that was in the room. Again, I come to, but this time the world was distorted and it didn't seem tangible at all. It felt like a dream, and it was as though I'd never seen reality before. I had no reference to anything. My partner seemed familiar but appeared 2D and alien looking, with huge eyes and a pointy chin. He was panicked and was speaking complete gibberish. Behind him, the chairs in our dining room were made up of completely the wrong shapes, just floating stationary in the air. I was not even slightly convinced by what I was looking at. I'm not sure how many times I regressed into the void. How do you hang on to reality when you don't know what it is? Coming down, I recalled dreamy images of my family, almost as though I was reliving childhood memories. I was comforted by it, but it didn't seem to be very important or memorable. My partner slowly faded into view. He was stood above me. I felt happy staring up at him from the floor and had a strong sensation of déjà vu. I was feeling very uninhibited. He's been saying something to me over and over again. I suddenly remember what words are. I sit up and tell him, "Yes, I'm okay." The paramedics asked me if I knew where I was. Look around, but I can't see anything familiar. My house, it was kind of a guess. They say I have to go, but I argue with them. I'm fine and this is my house, so I can be sick all over myself and sit on the floor if I want to. I couldn't trust these people. I really didn't want to go with them. I'm told I was violent, but I have no recollection of this. They called the police for their safety. I remember feeling like I was free-falling. I knew I was being sick only because I was disturbingly visualizing it moving slowly up a cross-section of my esophagus. I could hear my boyfriend telling me to sit up, but I really wasn't sure what up was. I come to gradually, and I'm sat on the sofa with the paramedic wiping sick off my face. There's a gap in my memory, and somehow I was in the back of the ambulance. I asked my boyfriend if he had seen what had happened. He said yes, and I felt relieved that I wasn't alone and actually believed he had shared my experience. Everything went dark, and I felt myself lose all control of my muscles. I convulsed violently and was strapped down. Before the police shut the door to the ambulance, I told everyone with disturbing conviction, I know what it's like to die. In the ambulance, I was suspicious that both my boyfriend and the paramedic were in on this cosmic joke I just experienced. I eyed them both up, wanting to say something, but not able to find the words. I kept thinking, they must know. By the time I got to the hospital, my mortality and the constraints of reality had dawned on me. I was relieved to be back in my body, but very somber. I apologized to everyone and thanked them as they hooked me up to ECG machines to monitor me. They didn't give me anything. I had a dreamless sleep, then we left the hospital about 3 in the morning. I still felt high, but my soul and body were bruised and battered to say the least. I had this odd feeling like I'd been away for a long time, like waking up from a coma. Those moments in the void felt like more than a lifetime, as cliche as that sounds. So that's my OD tale. It was a humbling, unforgettable experience that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. About 1.5 months when I began writing this, I'm back to baseline. I'm not sure how I came back or how I came back with my faculties intact. I know there are others that weren't so lucky. This was apparently a legal store-bought smoking blend, available to the public under the pretense of being legal cannabis. While smoking weed, I have had a few flashbacks where I would recall nonsensical aspects of the trip, then moments later they become forgotten like a dream. I had a couple of incidents of sleep paralysis. I experienced some derealization and fell into a weird dark existential depression that took a long time to pull myself out of. You can't define reality beyond your current experience that's happening right now. Since I came to this conclusion, my derealization and flashbacks stopped. I'm sure I won't ever forget this, but I'm alive as far as I can tell, and this experience has, in a way, made me forever grateful for that. So life has been rough lately. I'm working 40-hour weeks and then I go to a rehab group every night and then the day just repeats itself. Despite always being around people, I've been feeling really lonely. The only thing that used to keep me sane during these days was DXM. I've been trying really hard to stay sober, but with how depressed and lonely I've been feeling, I just couldn't resist the temptation anymore. So I ordered the free base robo tablets off Amazon and get ready to trip. I didn't want anyone to suspect I relapsed, so I only planned a first plateau trip. I took about 6 pills and waited for it to kick in. I eventually started to feel the body high, and it was definitely a relief in comparison to earlier in the day. I played some video games for a while before deciding I wanted more, so I took 3 more pills. The effects got more intense. I started to feel very weird emotionally, like all of the care for myself had just completely dissipated. It was confusing because I felt good physically, so my mind began to wonder why I wasn't feeling good emotionally. A whole rabbit hole of disorganized thought and panic led me to an idea that I should take all 100 pills from the bottle. Because of my mental state earlier in the day, this was a very appealing idea, so I put in my headphones, turned on my favorite YouTube video, and started to take more pills. Now, I'm not sure if anyone else is like this, but I become extremely suicidal on DXM if I'd been depressed the day before dosing, and because I was feeling suicidal sober, I believe that is why I was so nonchalant about taking so many pills. I didn't want to throw up, so I only took 4 every 10 minutes. As time went on, my heart started pounding, and the world around me was pounding with my heart. I got really hot, and I had to take off most of my clothes so I wouldn't faint from overheating. More time passed as I took more pills. My brain started to get foggy. My head as a whole felt really tingly and euphoric. I was amazed that I was still conscious. I started to hear music, like church bells ringing a sweet tune far off in the distance. I couldn't understand the YouTuber talking through my headphones anymore. It was like I had forgotten English, so I took out my headphones and took more pills. That's when I finally passed out. I had dreams where I spoke to the entities in charge of scripting our lives and how they can close mine out. I had flashbacks where I played Legos with my younger brother. I was living out in real time my entire life. It was like I was a kid again. But like most dreams, they all end when we wake up, and I wasn't expecting to wake up, but I did. I came to on my bed. The lights were on and I heard the same church bells ringing in the distance. I tried to get up, but my body just felt weak and heavy. My mom eventually came in with my dog and starts to speak with me. I can't understand what she is saying and I still can't move. My dog doesn't look like a dog, he's just a giant hairball that's getting in my face. I try to speak, but that's when I enter a time loop. I start to see my mom sitting in multiple parts of the room. She begins to talk again, but I can't make out the words. The world then begins to warp and bend into an alternate state where we are in the same room but it's arranged differently. I start to feel my spirit pull away from my body, but that's when the loop ends and starts back up again. After about an hour, I begin to wonder if this is my life now. Have I trapped myself in a purgatory of my mom finding me overdosing? Do I have to live this hell for all eternity? I begin to pray and plead that God can remove me from this hell. That's when the world started to collapse. I started to see colors and shapes that I never knew existed. My mom faded away with the rest of the world, and after all the colors faded, I was left in blackness. I was no longer in my body. It was a feeling I could not describe, but I knew that I was no longer in it. I wondered if I had died. I tried to call out, but couldn't speak without a mouth. I had phantom memories of my arms and legs, but could not move or see them anymore. I began to feel as if I was moving, like the entity of my being was being carried, spinning in aimless directions, not even feeling the faintest gust of wind. The office that I work in began to manifest itself. My core being was placed into a humanoid shell by the computer. I tried moving the arms I now had, only to realize this was just a demonstration. I still don't understand what this was all for, but even this world began to cripple and disappear. Elements and chemical reactions began occurring all around this thick black space. I continuously watched worlds be created and destroyed without rhyme or reason. I saw and felt beautiful things I have no idea how to describe. I saw entities that don't exist on Earth. I saw elements that haven't been discovered yet. I felt as if I discovered the inner workings of reality. This is what needs to happen for reality to exist. I felt as if this was my job as a spirit, to work and create to make sure the illusion of reality was stable. After what felt like hours of exploring this beautiful universe, I began to see a light. As it got brighter, it got warmer. I started to see grass materialize and flow to wind that I could not feel. My vision slowly came back. I had been returned to my body. I was sitting outside with my mom. I was only wearing pants and there was a bucket in front of me. My vision was delayed and it felt like my body was trying to reject my spirit. It was so beautiful and warm outside. I had no idea if anything I was seeing was real. I stood up and blacked out again. My parents told me that after I was outside, I had a couple of seizures and that they had taken me to the emergency room. The only thing I remember from that point on is being in a large room attached to a million cords, glancing at my dad and wishing him a happy Father's Day. A couple days pass. I wake up and I'm in the hospital. I've got oxygen in my nose. My left hand is swollen and I can barely move a muscle. I have cuts and bruises all over my body. My skin is clammy and pale. The doctors told me that I had pneumonia and rhabdomyolysis. They said I came really close to death and that I shouldn't move. I asked them what day is it. My voice is very raspy and weak. When they tell me Tuesday, my heart sinks. I had taken the pills Friday night. I had been unconscious for 4 days. I can't remember anything that happened. I remember what I took, but I don't remember how much or what happened. I've only recently gotten memory back of everything that happened that day. The doctors told me that there was 51 pills left, which means my total dosage was around 1,470 milligrams. I was in the hospital for 9 days and had to take antibiotics for 14 days. I am happy to be alive. I'm in the process of getting the help I need. I am now on lithium and I'm back in a rehab program. Please stay safe out there and know that there is always someone out there who is willing to listen.